Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'd like to talk about aspects related to language learning and language acquisition. I know that a lot of you are interested in language learning, and language learning is a great way to spark language acquisition, I would say, or just the process of learning a new language, right? But language learning is actually a temporary goal in language learning. It's not really about short-term objectives. So while there are many apps out there and many other tools that you could use, games that you could engage in, those are great usually for aspects that are related to getting your interest, sparking your motivation to start learning more. And it's not necessarily focused on long-term objectives. There might be new apps out there that offer more immersion. That might very well be the case, and I'd be happy to try these out down the line and to see if I actually think about that as well. That would be useful as well, as the creators of the apps would probably have thought of. So that is something that could very well be interesting down the line. But the idea here is, if we look at scientific literature and what has been written on it, then what we can say is that there's a lot more that is required to focus on acquisition. So like kids also learn a language, this has a particular way in which it's presented, right? And that's usually not focused on language learning from books, right? Because usually you wouldn't sit down with a toddler to say, look at this picture, this word. You do that when they focus on reading or when they want to start writing. Only then would that come into play. Before that time, you would focus on other aspects related to particular tasks that they would have to do, right? So that could be interesting to focus on as an adult too. If you look at second language acquisition, those processes are more complex because people have lived longer by that time, and they're able to to do certain things perhaps well, and other things perhaps not so well yet. And it has to do with experience, but also with knowledge and aptitude, like how well can you learn languages. Age, like when do you start learning a language? So the earlier you start, the easier it will be. But there are also, health benefits. Alzheimer's prevention, for example, if you start learning languages at an older age. So there are universities in the north of Netherlands, for example, that offer programs now for the elderly, which I think is a great way to focus on health benefits in what second language acquisition could do. All right, so back to language learning. If you want to make the transition from language learning to language acquisition, what you would need to do is you would need to focus on other aspects. Any training courses actually explain a lot about those things, but one example would be not to over-focus on grammar rules. So at lower levels, let's say B levels, we focus a lot on verb tenses. So verb tenses are discussed there. Not so much in C1 or C2. So note that a lot of people might think, oh yeah, language learning is learning verb tenses, is about this or that. Well, it could be at higher levels, could be focused on what you could do with verb tenses, and there might be nuances to it, new ways that you haven't considered. That might very well be the case. But what you need to know now is that each level has its own topics in language learning, its own ways of dealing with things, with topics. For example, articles, a or un or the, right? Those articles, definite and indefinite articles, are explained at an A level. But at a C level, they're revisited because then they start to have different meanings, and they have meanings before that time, but there's so much to cover that you probably won't be able to, focus on everything. So one of the things you would need to know then is okay, how do I get from A to B? So language learning, if we over-focus on grammar rules, would mean that you would do assignment after assignment after assignment, test after test, maybe even, and it might not yield to you being able to apply that grammar rule in real life. So that's a drawback, right? That's also why the classic PPP method, so that's presentation of the grammar rule, let's practice some items, do some homework, and then maybe even a test down the line, right? Next class or something like that, how that doesn't work for people. So most people also admit to having learned English after they actually went on living their lives after high school, right? So that is because certain frameworks were useful for an educational purpose, but to meet educational goals like be able to pass tests, but have no real relevance for the real world. And we see transitions being made more and more to be able to accommodate to needs that people would have in the real world and how to cater to those needs. But that's usually what people do in that's secondary, in tertiary, tertiary education. So that's the third layer. And whether that's, focused on practical professions, or it's focused on maybe social media content, or learning and development, right? So these types of, or maybe accounting at, mid-level, or if it's about, going to university and having to also do some research, which would also, in some ways, would do at a University of Applied Science, but that's completely different type of research, right? So there might be some similarities, but mostly it's quite different, and the rules are different in terms of the rules of conduct and what you can and can't do, and rules around plagiarism are really, really different. It's not paid as much attention to as at a University of Applied Science, as opposed to a regular university. And I call it regular university because the meanings internationally also differ. So University of Applied Science, you can also take a master's there, and that's something that is also done in some English speaking countries. But the bottom line, internationally, there will be some differences in how they are perceived, and that could be favorable or unfavorable. It really depends on the employer. Some people only want to work with people who have a University of Applied Sciences degree because they feel that they are less critical, less argumentative, maybe less focused on details and things that would need to have less of an overview. And I would say that people who go to university are trained to be critical and to really dive into complex matter to see, okay, what is really there and what isn't, and how can we deal with that in future research to avoid certain thought mistakes of having been made and then proliferating our research, right? So the idea then is to come to a type of truth, like what can we find objectively within a population, medically speaking, for example, or how can we explain this phenomena? And there are different methods that are scientifically vetted that are deemed appropriate to figure that out, to use for that purpose. Research can also go, be about how to use instruments for research, right? So methodology research could also be. You also have research that focuses on heaps of studies, let's say hundreds of studies, to see if there are patterns, similarities, and differences, and what future research should focus on, or how a particular field should be changed in terms of how it's perceived or approached. So these metadata studies are interesting because, again, you would find things from literature review that you may not find in more practically oriented research, and it all has its place, right? Really depends on what you want to do, but it's not the case that you should go to university only if you want to do research. It's also useful to be able to understand the world better. So there are reasons why people would want to be able to do that, so that, to have a complete overview of things that go on in the world. Whereas if you go to a University of Applied Science, you would know what to do with it in a particular field, how to become a great and compliant accountant, for example. You would be able to do that really well, probably have job offers lining up and have economic and success. So there's a lot of benefits to be gained either way, depending on the road that you take, right? So what would be required down the line in general, if you look at language learning, is what you will find is, if you look at traditional textbooks at an A level, B level, or C level, that the lower levels are also assume that people aren't as highly intelligent as they could be, right? That's one of the reasons why I chose to focus on tailor-made solutions, because tailor-made solutions, I mean a solution to a training problem, or to, let's say, a communication problem someone might have, right? So that could be something like a training problem could be something like, I want to pass an IELTS test with a particular score because I want to enter into a program. Or a language objective or problem could be, well, I have to do more marketing. I know I have to write prompts for AI now, but I don't really know how to do that well. And instead of just focusing on copying down every single prompt that I see on social media, which stresses me out, I actually want to be able to write my own prompts These types of things could be valid reasons as to why you would want to, engage in language learning. It could also be that you're like, yeah, my writing is pretty good. I actually get great feedback from people on my writing, but when I start speaking, I feel uncomfortable. I feel like I can't find the right words. I can't really say what I want to do, or respond well. And then the moment is past and I feel awful about that because I just can't be myself. And I'm normally quite bubbly, but I can't be in English. These are all valid reasons why people would want to focus on, learning the language better. So it's not just about theoretically thinking about, okay, what type of tools do I need? Do I need an app? Do I need a course book? Do I need training? It's more about, okay, what is your particular context right now? How are you using the language? What do you notice about your skills? Do you feel like your particular areas are underdeveloped? What about your goals and objectives? What are your hopes and dreams? What do you want to focus on? Well, then you do, right? You focus on these areas, and that's what it is. So the bottom line is this. You would need to look at, okay, this is my goal and objective. How can I meet it? Well, I already published a video on what to do to accomplish, goals, like the SMART framework, like setting specific, measurable, acceptable, time-bound objectives, for example, that are also realistic and also inspiring. That would be one way to go. Ideally you would look at, okay, what context should I be? Is it general? Is it like, do I focus on real world, general aspects, or is it more focused on professions, like field specific vocabulary? Is it about context specific vocabulary that I need? What about the way that I communicate? What type of sentences am I using? What do I do in the language? How do I start, and how do I then connect information to each other? If you've done that, then great. Okay, is it then communicatively effective? Like, how do people respond to me when I speak? And do I actually pay attention to the relationship, or am I only focusing on meeting my goals in English? And have I been able to establish friendships with people, for example, in the target language? Is that something I'm interested in? Well, it could very well be that your objective ideally would be to have a social conversation with people and to, be able to do better at networking events, for example. Well, if that's your objective, then it would be a good idea to just go to networking events to see, okay, what can I do well at networking events, and what can't I do well, and how do people respond, and what type of words don't I know yet, and which words do I know, and did I surprise myself? Did I do better than I expected, or was it worse than I expected? And what was the reason for that? Do I have any explanation? Was it because I had an awful night of sleep, or was it because I didn't eat well, or was it because I was stressed out about meeting new people, or was it because I simply couldn't find the right words to say, and maybe didn't really know how to navigate timing, or was struggling with accents because the certain input I couldn't really understand. So, there's so many layers, so much to consider when we talk about language learning. So what this channel will do for you is I will focus on certain areas of language. So also drop lines in the comments, please, so that I know what you would be interested in. And the idea would then be to help you spark that learning and to focus more on how to get from language learning to language acquisition, because ideally that would be the case, that you would focus on that, not on 50 idioms focused on the word car or something like that. I'm just making up a word, or focus on the word put or something, the verb put. It's not necessarily about knowing all sorts of idioms to use. It could be useful, and yes, I can make a video on that, but there are many other channels that would offer that type of information. I would focus on different things, like how to get from A to B, what type of language would you need in a particular setting or context, would that be useful for you, what would you like to learn, how can I create context based on what you want to do. So maybe you want to, maybe get a driver's license when you're abroad while applying for a visa or something like that. Well, then you might need vocabulary and phrases that driver's instructors would use to be able to understand them well, right? So that you're able to also ask the right questions, ask about the right context, but also know, okay, how to vet, how to see which school would be good for you. So there are, all sorts of reasons why you would want to focus some more on language learning and language acquisition. So the takeaway from this video is this. What is your current situation? How are you using English? What is going well and what isn't in the domain you're using it in? Is what you would like to achieve also in that same domain? Great. If not, What do you think the requirements are to be able to communicate well in that area? Have you ever taken a test? What is your starting level? Do you objectively know what your starting level is? If not, then that's something you can get tested, can have tested, and then, you know, that would be like a pre-course situation, like an intake result. And it says something about where you are right now in a particular language area. So for the online Oxford placement test, that would be parts of the receptive skills. So we know grammar and vocabulary, and that's it, right? So we don't focus on reading or speaking or writing. So we can't say anything about that. So some schools say, well, now you know your level in English. Well, no, you don't know your level in English. You know your level in English when it comes to some receptive skills, like the recognition and the active choice in vocabulary and in grammar, and you know a little bit about listening skills, because listening skills are tested, and then it depends on the settings, whether you're exposed to completely British English or to a mixture of British English and American English. That is something to take home from it. Then it depends on the language school that you select. If you want to select a language school, whether or not they offer, you know, written and spoken assessments within that context. Some don't. They just start working with a course book, and it start at page 1 and then end at page whatever. That could be an approach, but if that's not what you want, then you should select a school that actually offers the assessments, that you're able to start your first real session with actual content that you would want to learn. For example, that would be focused on a target context, like English for tourism or something like that, hospitality industry, and how to, for instance, deal with customer complaints, or how to navigate networking conversations, right, in that area, or how to post on social media, or and how to do that in ways that would appeal to people who actually are selecting a travel agents to be able to, you know, buy a travel planner package somewhere exotic, something like that, right? So there could be all sorts of reasons why people would go for certain language schools. It needs to feel good, but there's a lot you can do yourself, and that would just, you know, use language apps if that's something that is useful to you, but then tie it to a topic that might have come up in a language app that you thought was interesting but don't know a lot about or want to refresh, and then see, okay, can you recognize it in real life? When is it used? Can you see it in conversation? Turn on the subtitles or captions when you're watching a movie, for example, and can you then see where you would where that would be used, and how, and what that means in context? And if you know that, then what it means in context would then happen is that you would be able to see, okay, oh, this is when it's used, and then the next time you're in a situation like that, you know, okay, now I can use this particular verb tense, for example, and I can use it because it signals this and that was my intention, that was deliberate.